What's up guys, Nick Wisdom with HeliDirect here with another in-depth build video, this time with the SAB IL Goblin Pro, which is an updated version of the RAW, the fourth generation of that series of helicopter. And this is the Pro edition. There is a RAW edition in the IL Goblin series as well. All right. This one's got a little bit more of a Kraken style to it. It's got a fully molded boom that goes with this beautiful canopy as well. All right, we're going to go ahead and tuck this aside. All right, let's cover a few basic ground rules. First of all, in every SAB kit, one of the first things you'll see on the top of the page is this registration card. Now, especially in a brand new series of models like the IL Goblin Pro, definitely want to go ahead and fill your serial number in, send this in to the website. Instructions are all on the card. And what this does is if SAB replaces a part that's later found to be defective, which in all new kits, like with new cars, can happen in a new model year. So definitely register your model, and then SAB will notify you if they find something wrong. All right, with that, you also get the manual, and in the early edition of the manual, there's a number of these insert pages. This one details optional accessories, some safety warnings, and then some upgrades, more optional colors, parts. There's a yellow canopy and boom that will be available probably by the time you're watching this video. All right, there is also one very important insert page that we'll talk about in just a second. That's actually an update to the manual itself. Before we get started, just a couple of notes. In the description at the bottom of this video, there's a table of contents. That's going to tell you where all of the various sections and sub-assemblies of the helicopter are built, some links so you can jump around in time code, or in the case of a multi-part like this, it'll tell you which episodes contain which pieces. No need to watch the entire video, just watch the parts you're having trouble with. Essentially treat this as a video build along manual, or if you're considering purchasing the kit, you can skim your way through the video to see what you might be getting yourself into. This video is really aimed at the beginner builder, and while it's unlikely a 700 is your first helicopter build, it may be your second or third. Maybe you just are a little nervous, want a little extra confidence by seeing someone build the model as well, in case you get stuck or in case the manual is not very clear. But speaking of the manual, it is very clear in general, as all SAB manuals are. We'll be referring to it often. We'll go ahead and jump over to it throughout, as well as feature an overhead camera throughout the build as well. All right, with that, let's go ahead and just get started on this thing. All right, so first time we reference the manual, I'm just going to call out a couple of things in SAB manuals. If there's a step they really want to make sure you don't miss, there'll be this exclamation mark. Anything with standard Loctite, which I'm using Loctite 243, oil resistant Loctite. SAB also makes their own blue Loctite as well. Just basic thread locker. And then anywhere that's marked in green, whether they sort of color the part in green or the entire bolt means to put a little bit of green and use this sparingly. Loctite, that's a retaining compound used for holding bearings in place, or if you want a screw to never, ever, ever, ever come undone. There's also a couple spots they may mention CA glue or using some lubricants such as Tri-Flow or a synthetic grease as well. All right, with that, let's dig into the first page of the manual. This covers the main transmission assembly, and typically in an SAB kit, you would actually be assembling these gears here underneath. They have given you a fully exploded parts diagram here. However, this entire step has been done for you. There is, however, one exception, and that is where this insert comes in the digital manual, which I'm using for this build video. You'll see this page has already been inserted in the manual. If you have one of the first releases of the kits, it's in an insert page that goes in here, and what that explains is this bag. So you'll have one bag that says bag for page 5, and there's a Delrin bushing, essentially a spacer in there. And you may be wondering what it's for, and you'll stare at the printed manual like I did for a second until you realize there's this insert page. And let me show you what that's for. So inside the transmission, there actually are two one-way bearings here stacked on top of each other, presumably for just better grip and overall performance for hard 3D. However, if auto rotations are a greater priority for you, you can remove the one-way bearings and replace the lower one here with this Delrin bushing. So that way you're only overcoming the resistance of one-way bearing instead of two during auto rotations. So that's what this is for. I'm going to go ahead and leave it stock and tuck that aside. And we'll go ahead and get into the next step. So this is the transmission assembly right here. They've actually pre-greased the one-way bearing already for you, which is great. And they've actually Loctited all of the screws, not this one because it goes into a nylon lock. Anywhere metal comes into contact with plastic, you don't want thread locker. But all of the other bolts throughout the transmission have been Loctited already. There is grease on the one-way and the transmission is good to go. So really on page 5 of the manual, there's essentially nothing you need to do. They do give you the exploded parts diagram just in case. Moving into the next step, we're going to go ahead and start bolting brackets onto our transmission. And these are servo brackets. And we'll go ahead and grab the first one here. Do pay attention to these recesses here and here, make sure they face up, and this is going to go ahead and bolt onto the back side of the transmission case. So I'm using Loctite 243. It is an oil resistant Loctite, and I just take one of the 12,032 bags that come in the kit, and I just simply roll the screw in the Loctite, roll it on the tip of my finger to get some of the excess off, and then we'll go through the bracket in the recess into the hole. Anywhere, of course, you have more than one mounting screw holding something on, just loosely put the first screw in. Don't go past sort of snugging it before you tighten anything down. Get all the screws in. So we'll go ahead, same thing. I like to push the Loctite into the threads, get rid of the excess, and tighten it down. Now that I have both screws in, I'm going to go ahead and snug both of these down good and tight. No need to go crazy. Don't play He-Man on here. And then we now have our assembly here. All right, we're now going to go ahead and take the elevator servo bracket and attach it here. It does have an angled portion on it here. That is also called out in the manual, so make sure you get this angled side facing the correct direction. There's also a finishing washer that will go over the top of this bolt as well, and I tend to do the Loctite first, push it through the finishing washer, and then head through the hole, and then go ahead and get it started. Do the same thing on the other screw. And then once they're both finger tight, you can go ahead and snug them down. All right, next step coming over to the manual here is to work on our servos. Now, in the case of the SAB servos, they use this unique bracket here, and then the servos go at kind of a unique angle, and I'm going to walk you through how we'll go ahead and do this. These are our two front servos here, and this is the rear elevator servo. Note that the servo horn here goes across the body of the servo, and these go out at an angle, and SAB includes a nice little tool to help us do all of that. All right, let's go ahead and dig into how that is done. So you're going to want to get something that you can power up your servos with, a servo tester, and center them. So servo-wise, in this build, I'm using the Torque BLS 2808 12-volt servos. No need to use 12-volt servos in this model. It's just something I want to try. You know, a standard high-voltage servo will work great, but these Torque servos I've heard great things about, and I'm looking forward to trying in this build. So in order to, before we can bolt them in the frame, we have to go ahead and install our servo horns and our balls on the servos. So the way we're going to do that is I'm going to go ahead and power up this is the Torque Servo Programmer. These servos have a programmable center point on them, such that I can actually set the center point and the frequency, meaning are they 760 or 1520. I'm going to go ahead and run mine at 1520. So plug the servo in. I'm going to go ahead and press frequency. 1520 in my case is now lit up. I'll hit enter. And now that that's done, I'm going to take my servo horn. These are not included in the kit. I like to use the SAB servo horns because the hole is spaced at 18 millimeters in that middle hole that we're going to use throughout this kit. Now, servo-wise, if we look at the manual, it shows how you take this bracket here and we'll place it over the top of the servo. And this just fits on these, which is great. It's a nice tight fit with this adapter. Now, the idea here is to get the servo in line with this little peg coming out of the adapter. And if you look in the manual, you can see that the two servos are opposite angles to each other, so you need to make one going each direction. And then what I'm going to do is just loosely fit the servo horn on as close as possible to that angle. Now, if I was doing, you can see how they're close but not perfect here. They don't completely cover each other. Now, if I was doing this with a non-programmable servo, I would call this good, go ahead and install the screw. And then I would adjust my center point in my radio and flybarless system. However, since these are programmable servos, what I'm actually going to do is take this torque servo programmer, and you can actually watch. I can adjust this on the fly. I'm just going to face it towards me so I can get this as close as I can to dead center. And now look at that. See how it's dead center aligned. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter on the programmer. It gives me that confirmation beep. I'm going to go ahead and unplug the servo. Now, next thing to do is obviously get the servo screw Loctited that holds the servo horn into the servo. So I'll get some Loctite on that screw. Do my usual push it into the threads, wipe off the excess off my hand. Don't worry, I'll stop saying that soon. But I say it for the first few, and I'll go ahead and get that nice and tight. And then the next thing we have to do is get this tiny screw and ball into the servo arm. Now, anytime you're going through plastic with a screw, you definitely do not want Loctite coming in contact with the plastic. So what I do is I take the screw and I go through dry. So I'm just going to go ahead and thread this through the servo horn with nothing on it. And then I'm going to leave the driver in here, and I'm going to take the Loctite that I put on my bag and just dab some onto the tip without getting any on the servo horn of the ball. So you can see there's just a tiny dab maybe there. Then I'm going to take my ball here, put it on my driver, and then thread it over that little blob of Loctite here. And then I've got a driver in one side, and I'm going to tighten these against each other. Don't go crazy, you'll actually snap the servo horn if you do, but snug them up nice and tight, but not crazy tight. And there we go, we have the ball on the servo ready to go. And then I've actually gone ahead, so you don't have to sit and watch me, done the other. So you'll notice I have a set at either angle, both preset with the adapter. Now, what's cool about setting the center point with a programmable servo, I'm going to go ahead and flip this servo to some random position. I'm going to power this servo up, and it's powered up to this center point. And if I go ahead and stick this adapter back on here, you'll see that the center point is dead on with the bracket. If I can get this angled the correct way to the camera, there you go. Just like that. So, theoretically, when I set this up and level my swash in the helicopter, this is already set to the correct center point. All right, now these are the two cyclic servos in the front. I leave them sort of set to that rough angle of center point, so I make sure I bolt them onto the right side. The elevator servo, same thing here. The ball goes in the center on the 18 millimeter hole, so that's 18 millimeters from the center of this screw if you're using a different servo or servo arm, and the center point is directly across the body of the servo, and there's our rear elevator servo horn. Now, I tend to, since I have to get everything out anyway to sort of do the 3 cyclic servos, I went ahead and I skip ahead in the manual to the tail servo, and it turns out in the tail servo they also want the ball in the 18mm slot, and the horn is going to go servo this way, spline this way, servo horn straight up, and the center point is 90 degrees to the body of the servo. So I went ahead and knocked out the tail servo, got that programmed, and the servo horn installed, and I'm just going to tuck that servo aside. We won't need it till much later in the build. All right, let's check back in with the manual and see what's next. All right, next up we're going to assemble the bracket here at the top, and then go ahead and bolt our servos in, and then bolt the servo subassembly to our transmission. Now here's what's cool. If you've ever had another SAB kit before, you'd know that removing these 2 servos was always a little bit tricky once they were mounted in the model. But now with just these 2 screws right here, you can remove this whole assembly and remove a servo quite simply without having to take apart all kinds of stuff, because the motor was always in the way of getting a driver into here. So, all right, let's go ahead and dig those parts out now. If you haven't built an SAB kit, the bags are all numbered by page, so I'm looking for the bag for page 7. It'll look just like that, and everything will be neatly organized in there. So, all right, first things first, it's quite simply a matter of taking the top of the servo bracket and bolting it to the bottom. So the pieces that stick up face up on your bench. The servo upper support, or our alignment pin guide, has little recesses right here, and those will face up such that the bolt heads don't stick out. Set the 3 screws loose. Once they're all in, you can go ahead and sock them all down. Do be careful in these aluminum parts. They are engineered to be fairly lightweight, so don't go crazy over tightening these. You will start tearing the threads up, but obviously you do want it nice and snug. Next up, we're going to go ahead and start mounting our servos. SAB diagrams in their manuals are excellent, so do take your time. Make sure you have the bracket just like it is in the photo, with this little ledge here sticking up. And then we're going to take our servos, drop them in with our servo horns going the correct direction, like so. Triple check it against the manual before we apply anything else. Now, one of the cool things about these torque servos is they come with these little brass inserts that help align the servo. Now, all that they do is make it so that the screw goes through the sort of bracket part of the servo, perfectly aligned with center. Now, why does this matter? Essentially, the reason they do it is so when you are servicing the helicopter, if you remove a servo, replace a servo, take it out to replace servo gears or a servo horn or something, it guarantees that the servo will go back exactly where it was so that your swash plate stays level and all that. So I've got all our brass inserts in. If you are using washers, servo washers like these torque ones, you do not need to use these carbon servo washers, servo plates, whatever you want to call them. If you are not using something like a servo centering, you definitely do need to use these carbon plates to sandwich them. So just go ahead, get a little Loctite on each of the servo screws, set them all in loose before you commit. All right, now with all 8 of our servo screws started and aligned, we can go ahead and tighten them all down. We're going to tighten opposite, so we'll do one corner here, and then we'll go down to this bottom corner, snug it, snug the opposite corner, snug the opposite corner to the similar pressure, and then we're just going to slowly crisscross our way back and forth, tightening them down the rest of the way. Don't over tighten these. Go till it's snug and give it another little quarter turn or so and call it good. Okay, with that, that is our first servo assembly here for our front cyclic servos, and then we're going to go ahead and do the rear facing servo as well. By the way, if you've never built an SAB kit before, they're great at giving you lots of different parts for extras, and so you'll want to start a bag pretty early on that all of your extra bits of screws if they give you two different lengths, or your servo plate adapter, various odds and ends that they'll give you along the way. Just keep a bag handy, and then you don't have just extra stuff all over your workbench, which quickly piles up. All right, so back to our main frame here. We're going to grab our elevator servo. For our rear-facing servo, again, a quick look at the manual to make sure we have it correct. Use this little angled piece here to help you figure out that's the servo spline side, and the servo will go this direction here. I'm going to go ahead and get my torque servo spacers in here. Just going to be a little tricky to balance all of this without throwing them all over the floor. Again, if you are just using a different servo that doesn't come with these, then use the carbon servo washers that SAB provides to trap the servo. And same exact process here to install and tighten these. Okay, now we have our rear-facing servo installed. And it's just a matter now of you'll notice in the screws that came out of that packet, there are two larger M3 bolts here, and those are for installing our servo assembly down onto the mount. So you'll see there are these two alignment pins right here, and the servo horns are going to face inward, and those points are going to align with the holes in this bracket right here, and then our two bolts are going to go right through that. So it's just a matter of pushing it down on that alignment like so. So now you can see the sort of caps in here, or the pins coming through just barely, and we'll go ahead and drive those two M3s with Loctite, of course, in there to hold this servo assembly. Do keep in mind that this is an assembly you'll be removing if you need to service the servo, so don't go crazy with the Loctite here. I'm going to remove a lot of it with my finger, as I do. For that very reason, it makes the bolts easy to remove. And nice, slick little servo mount. I love that SAB listened to, complaints is kind of the wrong word, but I think if anyone said, like, hey, what are things we can improve? Someone would say, make it easier to access the front cyclic servos. And they certainly did that with this. So nice touch, SAB. Now, these guys, being M3s, are a little stronger. Definitely don't go crazy, but give these a little bit of just a hair beyond a quarter turn. You don't want your cyclic servos moving at all. And now we have our transmission assembly with 3 servos in no time at all. That might be the fastest I've ever done this on an SAB model. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next page. Now, one of the things I like about the way they set up the manual here is page 8 is one side of the frame and page 9 is the other, so there's no way you can screw it up. If you open the bag for page 8, you'll have the correct side frame in your hand. Sometimes it takes a minute to make sure left is left, right is right, etc. First thing they talk about in the manual is if you're running wires over the edge of the frame, you want to take a little sandpaper and just round the edge of the side frames. I tend to skip this step, and then just anywhere I have wire going over the edge, I protect the wire in some fashion. And we'll talk about that when we do wiring. But if you want to follow the manual to the T, just go ahead and do that. Do keep in mind that carbon dust is highly toxic, so do it outside, wear a mask, or what I like to do it in the kitchen sink. So I'm wet sanding and I wear a mask there as well, and the water just rinses it all away. First thing we're going to want to do is get our canopy position bases in place. Let's orient the frame just like it is in the manual, and then we're going to go ahead and have to get some Loctite in these threads here. The way I like to do that, this is called an awl. It's essentially just a metal pointy stick, and I dip it right in my Loctite, and then I basically just paint the Loctite around the threads of the part. And obviously when I spin the nut around, it's also going to move this around. But you can see I get a nice coating of Loctite on those threads there. And then we'll hold up the frame just like it is in the manual. Push this piece through here and spin this nut over the top. If you have a 5mm driver, it actually fits inside here. So you can tighten this piece here with a wrench on the part. Probably overkill, but why not? So now I can hold the nut in place and use this adjustable wrench, this driver to snug that up. Okay, so we've got our canopy clip, and then we've got to get these blind nut capturing pieces installed next. Those are going to go in from the opposite side of the canopy retention piece. So these come in on the back side here. Now, these are cool. If you've never built a raw, you've never seen these before, but if you've done a raw, it's just like in the raw side frames here. There's essentially this metal bushing here that's got threads in it, and what we're basically doing is dropping it in this hole here and here on our frames, and then we're going to take a very small chamfered head screw from the opposite side and just capture it in the side frame. So it just basically is installing a nut permanently into the side of the frame. So you spin it around till it aligns, and take this little guy and just snug those up. Don't go crazy on those, and then do the same thing on this other one. Make sure you get it in the correct hole. They're essentially parallel to each other. So get this other little guy. And also the holes for these screws here are both chamfered as well, so it's easy to figure out where those go. Okay, so we've got our two blind nuts captured now. All right, battery rails. This is cool. So I like things that make builds easier. So on the battery rail, you'll see there's these raised studs that I'm sure is where our lower side frames will probably mount to. So we're going to take our frame with the captured blind nut side facing us, and you'll see there's these large circular holes at the bottom here. We're going to line it up so this first stud that comes off of our battery tray here, this piece here, goes into the second hole, and then the others will line up on its own. So when you look at the back side here, you'll notice that there are now three. If I tilt this way, well, all of these studs have come through the holes. This first hole here, however, towards the front will be open, and then at this point we're only taking two of these M3 bolts and installing them to capture this battery frame. And if you look very closely at the battery rail, you will see here and here there are these threaded inserts in the plastic that these M3 bolts will bolt into, so you definitely want a little bit of Loctite on these guys. I like stuff like this because, number one, it serves a dual purpose. It's the battery tray, and it's also giving us threaded alignments, probably for our lower side frames. I haven't looked ahead in the manual here yet, but it's self-aligning. So all of these pieces, you know, once those little studs went through those holes, it aligns for us. So now we have our side frame with our battery rail captured here, and let's move on to the next page. All right, we're going to take this side frame, take it aside, and do a similar but slightly different. There's a few more pieces that go in this side frame. Our battery tray latch is going to go in here. Now, one of the nice things SAB does too is each sub-assembly is in a little bag. So sometimes instead of dumping them all out, if you haven't built one of these before, dump them out one at a time and then take care of just that one part. So I've dumped out the bag with the battery latch in it. I'm going to go ahead and pop over to the manual, and you can see here, let's get our side frames aligned such that it's set just like the manual. And then this little battery latch guy is going to push right into here. So let's go ahead and jump over to the table here. It's going to go in here, and these two little threaded guys are going to line up like so with the two included bolts from the back side. So go ahead, Loctite these through the side frame into the battery latch. And by taking these out of the bag one at a time, we know that it's these two bolts. I don't have to hunt around and look up what size they are. I just know that it's the two that came with the battery latch in that bag. Super simple. And then anytime in any of these kits you get something like this, you see how there's this little screw right here? Now, I trust SAB. It's probably Loctited, but I'm going to check it. Because what happens if the screw falls out? Yeah, that's definitely Loctited. That's a lot of resistance there. If this little screw pops out on another kit, the battery retention could fail and the battery could slide out, and we know that's catastrophic. So anytime you get one of these little sub-assemblies, they say it's Loctited, give it a quick check. That's cool. Nice little battery latch there. All right, next up here is that same canopy attachment point we did before. That installs just like the other side. I'll go ahead and do that now. Okay, there's our canopy attachment installed. The canopy attachment side, not the nut side, goes on the same side as the battery latch. We're going to do our blind nuts again, just like on the other side. Same rodeo here. Okay, so now we've got our blind nuts in here. On the back side is where the bulk of the material is. Battery latch, canopy attachment point. Lastly, we're going to go ahead and install our battery tray in the same way. Last stud goes in the back side here. The first stud goes just past the battery latch, and the open mouth of the battery tray here on that side, and then the larger side towards the back. This is the front of the side frame, this sort of pointy end here, and then we'll go ahead and get these two M3 bolts in here as well. And neatness does count, so if you splooge a little too much Loctite, it's nice when you clean it off the frame. Makes the whole thing look good, so take a second to do that. All right, with that, we have our other side frame complete. Again, blind nuts, battery tray, battery latch, canopy attachment point. All right, moving on. Next step, these are always fun, where we basically insert a world of screws to attach the side frames to our transmission. There's also a couple of frame spacers here. So go ahead and locate the bag for page 10. That's got all those pieces and parts in it. Get that ready, and then we'll dig into it. Okay, you'll notice there's now a tempered glass shelf on my build table. Whenever I'm bolting frames together, I like a nice super flat surface just to keep everything square. Honestly, in the case of most SAB kits, they sort of self-align, and this is kind of overkill, but it's just a long time habit of mine, so I'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to take my two side frames and sort of line them up against each other here. And then next up, first thing I'm going to do is take these two frame spacers, and you'll see there are these nice little holes in the battery tray that sort of self-align these. How cool is that? So this whole thing is going to support itself from the get-go without a single screw installed, just by me pushing these into those two little recesses. Check it out. Self-standing, haven't put a single bolt in, no fuss, no muss. Love it. Now, I'm not going to put any of those screws in there. I'm going to take my servo assembly, servo/drivetrain assembly, get that in here. Okay, so I'm going to pick a screw in the manual, in my case here, I'm going to start from right here. So you got to follow the red line. So this one does get a finishing washer. Not all of these do. You'll note the ones that go into these frame spacers do not get a finishing washer. It's this hole right here is where I'm going to start, because you got to start somewhere. So a little bit of Loctite on there. And I am not going to tighten a single bolt in here until they are all installed. And I mean all, like the ones in the frame spacers, everything. So we're just going to keep these super loosey-goosey. Alright, so there's that side. There is an opposite screw from the other side as well. So we'll go ahead and get that one loosely in there, and then this will just start to hold it together. It does look like we're going to go ahead and fill all three of these, 1, 2, 3, down towards the end of the frame, also with finishing washers. Okay, so now I have one side started, so you'll see there is the screw into the frame spacer here, and this one in the middle into the other frame spacer, and then 5 with finishing washers across the top of our drivetrain. Again, these are all super loose and finger tight. I'm going to go ahead and do the same on the other side. Alright, we now have everything finger tight and all of the bolts through here. So I'm going to go ahead and set it now on my glass plate. Make sure everything is square and everything sort of touching equally in the same sort of contact points. And I'm going to slowly tighten each of these screws opposite each other. And I do this so I don't tighten everything on one edge of the frame, which can sometimes sort of shift alignment as you go. But if you go back and forth, tightening opposite screws, it works out well, generally. Don't forget to also tighten the screws that go through the frame spacers as well. And I'm just sort of keeping light downward pressure onto the glass as well to ensure that all of the same contact points are remaining in place. And now I'm going to go ahead and just tighten our frame spacer bolts. I like the way they captured these frame spacers and put the little hexagonal ends on them so they don't rotate, so I don't have to hold them as I tighten these as well. Now, any of these steps where there are lots of these bolts going through a side frame, I always like to go through the manual and just check, look around, make sure I got all of the bolts it's talking about in there, and then also just look at your bench. Here's the other reason I clean all of the bolts and screws anytime they give us extra, like if they give us 2 different length options for a servo bolt. I get them all off my bench because I want to be able to look and go, are there any extra screws? There are not. I know I got all the right screws in the frame. So now we have our upper side frames and our drivetrain and servo mount assembly done. All right, moving on to page 11 here, we're starting to work on the rotor head. Now, this is one of those moments where I talked about there's a bag for page 11, but then inside that bag there are several bags for the different quadrants of the manual, and I like to take them apart one bag at a time, do a quadrant of the manual page slowly, and then finish them. Now, but you don't have to go necessarily in the same order of the manual, so I want to take care of all of the things that use grease last, because I don't like parts hanging out on the bench with grease on them. It just gets messy, so let's knock out everything else first. Let's go ahead and start with the linkage rod assembly first. These are our 2 main blade pitch links. The other tool that's a must here is well, I guess it's not a must, but it's is a digital caliper that will measure precisely the length of our linkages. Our goal here, according to SAB, is 75 to 76 millimeters from outside edge of ball link to outside edge of ball link. So we're going to go 75.5. See if we can get it exact. We did. I like the awl because SAB has a little hole in these, so you stick an awl or a driver through, doesn't matter, and then you can go ahead and do these. So the threads are opposite on this turnbuckle here, so I know it says left thread, right thread. I can never remember what that means, so I always have to try. So it looks like the longer length here is opposite thread. So SAB gives you this nice tool here for this purpose. So just slide the end of the ball link in here and go ahead and thread it in. So I'm going to go ahead and get these started and leave just a tiny bit of exposed thread underneath each ball link, and then we'll measure it in a second, see how we get. Okay, opposite side is going to be regular thread since the other one was opposite. I know some guys, by the way, like to use a power tool and an adapter to do this. I'm just going to caution you, never spin these fast enough that they heat up. If they get hot, they don't thread properly, and the metal doesn't engage into the plastic well enough, so it can pull apart on you, which you don't want. Now make sure as you measure that both ball links are facing the same direction, so the same side is facing up. And let's do our first test fit here. Looks like we still have quite a ways to go in on these. And you just got to go back and forth on these and keep test measuring. Looks like we're getting there, still quite a ways to go. 75.85, so we're within the range, so we'll call that good. I'm going to go ahead and build the other one and get it as close as I can. All right, these are now dang close to exactly the same size as each other. They're within 0.1 millimeter of each other, so close enough. All right, there's our 2 links done. All right, back to the manual. Let's see what's next here. Let's go ahead and do this guy here for our radius arms. Super simple, no Loctite, no retaining compound here because these are all plastic. So we're just going to go ahead and press fit these pieces here. Super simple here. So take the bearing, press fit it into one side. I like to take the awl, throw the brass bushing over it, other bearing, press fit. And there you go, it's just that simple. I still got the glass here, so I'm just going to give a good push. If you have a half-ton press, you can go ahead and use that, but it's kind of overkill, honestly. So there's one done. Go ahead and do the same thing for the other arm. Now for the other radius arm, or follower arm. This one we are going to use a little bit of green retaining compound for to capture these bearings. So I'll take a different baggie here, put a little bit of green Loctite. You can see it's very thin. It's made to penetrate. You don't need very much at all. And I'm going to show you how I go ahead and do that. So these are a similar process to the others where it's just a press fit of the bearing with a brass sleeve in between. The difference is we want a little bit of green Loctite. You can see in the manual that they are colored green here because they want you to put a little bit of retaining compound there. You can give you a little flagged base. So it'll tell you here it gives you excessive slop or play, which we definitely do not want. So take our awl, we're going to dip it in our green Loctite, and then I'm just going to trace the inside and kind of just paint this green Loctite on just the inside few millimeters on each side with the green. Don't want a lot. And I do this. We don't want to get green inside any part of the bearing that isn't the outside, so I'm going to dab off any excess with a paper towel and then just press fit that bearing. And I'm going to use the wiped off awl again to grab our brass insert and help guide the other bearing in. Come on. Press fit it down. There it goes. And these are a little loose. Once the green Loctite does its job, it'll do a good job of capturing that. All right, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing for the other one. So we're going to take our head block here with our spindle shaft, which we will grease. We're going to put some grease inside the head block here, and then in order, we're going to do the same thing on the opposite side here in reverse order. 3 of these 95 Shore O-rings here, dampeners, and then these Delrin dampers, which are hard plastic type material on the outside, and those will slide along our spindle shaft. So let's go ahead to the overhead again, and let's take care of that. Now, there are probably those of you that can do this way neater without getting grease everywhere. I'm going to use, by the way, this is Tri-Flow clear synthetic grease. Any clear synthetic grease will work well here for the most part. Now, the most important part is that we don't get any grease inside these threads where our spindle bolts will eventually go. The first thing I do is I take the head block in my hand and I will squeeze a little grease out on my finger, and I'm just going to smear it all around, just the inside. Not a ton. You don't want a ton of grease everywhere here, but we just want to get some in here. And I don't want a ton like inside the hole because I don't want it to get all over the spindle shaft as I push it through. I'm just sort of pre-greasing the inside here of the head. Okay, that looks good. Now I'm going to take my spindle, push that through, and then I'm going to take my dampeners, 3 of my O-rings here, and then I'm going to put some grease on my hand. Now that they are past the end, that's the key, and smear it all over these guys. As well as all over the shaft, move it back and forth, get it all around, get it on all sides of these. And then I'm going to push these into the head block. And if you take the Delrin piece last, it will help you kind of push them into the block. And the Delrin piece actually sits about flush. It sticks out a tiny bit. And that'll compress too when you put the spindle bolts in. But push that in well, and then I actually will take the whole thing and kind of push down on the spindle shaft, give myself a bunch of extra shafts sticking out this side, and I'll put these 3. Again, I'm just trying to get myself in a position where I can grease these 3 O-rings after they've passed by the spindle bolt threads so that I'm not risking getting grease all over place. And then I'm just going to work these around, getting grease onto the shaft, onto all sides of these dampers. And I also pre-greased, as you remember, the inside of the head block. Okay, and then I will push these guys in. And then take the Delrin piece and use it to further press these bearings in. I know my hands are all over the place, but I'm essentially compressing so that this Delrin piece here slides into the head block. And yes, there's grease everywhere. Yes, some people can do this way neater than I can. There we go. There's just no substitute for just kind of pushing. Don't force it, but you just have to kind of just slowly kind of see if I can, you can see my face making scrunchy. Just sort of pushing and compressing those O-rings. I've also now roughly made the amount of spindle shaft sticking out equal. Now I'm also going to take a second to take some paper towel and clean off all the extra grease that was on my fingers that is now all over the head block from me trying to get this whole mess on there. And then we'll stick that aside. That's now ready for us to get the rest of the parts to our head from the next page and continue building the head. So let's come back to the manual here. You can see here, now they show putting on the follower arms and all of that right away. That is the last part of this I'm going to do. We're actually going to work on the blade grips and the thrust washers and the blade grip arms in that order. Get my blade grips fully done. Now, obviously, if you've read any of the marketing material on these SAB blade grips, you can see that there's a nice keyed in blade grip arm onto the blade grip here, so that in the event of a crash, in the other raw versions, this could actually, the blade grip could tweak a little bit, this blade grip arm, and it would throw your pitch off or throw your tracking off, and whereas now this is a much more positive locking situation here, which is great. You get a healthy amount of Loctite on this guy through the blade grip arm into the blade grip. Just start the thread, make sure that key is aligned correctly before you go the rest of the way home. Definitely sock these home. It's a big old bolt. You're not at risk of hurting anything here. So give that the business for sure. Now, in the case of some parts of a helicopter that I know when you buy a spare part, they come with the two pieces. I'll use red Loctite, which is almost like a permanent bond. So in the case of the ball end of the blade grip arm, I know every time I order a new blade grip arm, I'm going to get a ball. So I'm going to go ahead and red Loctite these, kind of permanently bond them together. I don't ever need to be able to take this ball out. It's not a part I will ever replace without replacing the entire blade grip arm. So there's red Loctite in there. Let's go ahead and do the other one. I definitely use red Loctite sparingly, and like I said, it is not quite permanent, but it takes a lot of heat to break the red Loctite. So number one, remember where you put it, and number two, use it sparingly. A little goes a long way. All right, so that's that. Back to blue Loctite on the bolt through our blade grip arm. Again, get it started and send it home. All right, now incidentally, this little hole here, the other little hole in the blade grip arm, is actually for adding lubricant without having to take apart the entire blade grip. So if you want to put a few drops of Tri-Flow or similar onto your thrust bearings occasionally without taking the head apart, that's what that's for. Pretty cool. Nice little touches, SAB, as they continue to refine their rotor head system. Now, in the case of the blade grips, these radial bearings are already green Loctited in place, which it will tell you there. However, there's only the one bearing. Some blade grip designs from other manufacturers will go ahead and put both in for you. In the case of SAB, it's just one. The rest is going to be in this bag. Now, each thrust bearing set is in a different bag. Definitely don't mix these up. Looking over at the manual here for the rotor head, specifically at what goes inside the blade grips here. So you can see this is our thrust bearing. Are this group of three here with the larger inside diameter closest to the blade grip, followed by just a flat washer, a radial bearing, another smaller washer, and our spindle bolt here. Now, this particular washer here, it says washer with a lip, and I'll show it to you on camera in a second. It's a little hard to see, but if you stare really closely at that washer, you'll see like a concentric ring on one side, and the lip faces the bearing side, so towards the blade grip, and that's really important. So let's come back over to the table. So what I've done here is gone ahead and laid out everything in order from inside to out. All right, so this is our head block and spindle shaft. These two here are our washer with the lip. The little lip is going to face towards the bearing, so towards the blade grip, so the flat side of this washer goes against the head block. I'm actually going to go ahead and slide those on both sides now. You'll find that the grease on the shaft will kind of just hold these in place. They won't slide off easily. So just make sure you've got the lip side facing out. All right, we got those out of the way so they won't get confused. All right, thrust washer. Larger inside diameter. The main center portion of the thrust washer with our cage and bearings in it. And then the smaller inside diameter part of the thrust washer on the outside. Then there's a plain flat washer, another radial bearing, smaller washer, spindle bolts. Now, there is a little bit of additional prep here. With modern oil-resistant Loctites, you don't necessarily have to clean every bolt in a helicopter. However, when it comes to spindle bolts, I always take the time and extra care to go ahead and clean these. So I'm going to take some alcohol. This is like 99% isopropyl alcohol. I'm put it on a paper towel, and I'm going to spin the spindle bolt in a couple of spots on there. Now, I'll show this to you. Do you see those black smudges? That's oil that's in the threads of this. And while the Loctite is supposed to be able to handle that, this is a bolt you don't want coming undone. As you can imagine, this is the bolt that holds the entire blade grip on, and if it lets go in flight, it's catastrophic failure for the helicopter. So some of these bolts throughout the helicopter, and I'll call them out throughout the build video, we're going to take the time to really clean properly so that we don't have any issues or problems. And now it's just a matter of greasing and stacking the bearings. Oh, I did want to call out the thrust washer with the larger inside diameter goes towards the head block, as I mentioned, but how do you tell which is which? It's easy. Go ahead and slide it over the spindle shaft and rock it back and forth. Do you see how much that rocks back and forth? That means it's looser on the spindle shaft. If I take the one with the smaller inside diameter and rock it, this one moves far less. It moves a little bit, but less for sure. So you just go back and forth, compare them. The one that has the most movement is the larger inside diameter, and then it goes there. I'm going to tuck that aside, grab our grip, and we're going to go one grip at a time. And the way I like to do this is I take a driver, and I'm going to go outside to inside. So I'm going to go ahead and take the radial bearing and our flat washer, no grease on these, and just put them on the end of a driver. And now it's time to get messy. Again, put some grease on my finger, and I'm going to go ahead and grease the thrust washer here. Make sure I fill this track on the inside. That goes on the driver. And then for this guy here, you want to fill the cage of this. So every gap around all those little ball bearings in there, you want to fill with grease. You want to get grease coated on the backside. Now, there are schools of thought for whether the open cage, the side with the balls in it, should face in towards the center of the hub, or whether it should face out. I face mine in. Honestly, there's cases for why they should go both directions. I think just make sure both sides are symmetrical. Looks like the manual's calling for the open face in towards the center. So we'll go ahead and thread this part of the thrust bearing onto our driver next. Now, if you're wondering why I still have the glass on my bench, it's just because it keeps the grease out of my build mat. So it's a surface that after I finish building the heads is really easy to clean. So again, filling up this track of the thrust washer here with grease. And then that section here is good to go. I'll take a minute and get the extra grease off my fingers here. And then I will go ahead and take the driver and thread it into the blade grip. Get everything stacked, let it all slide down, kind of help the bearing a little, and then push it all into the grip. There we go. And then I will take this grip. Again, I've got my lipped washer with the lip side facing towards this grip, and we'll slide this on to
there. And then I'm going to take my spindle bolt and I'm going to liberally apply some Loctite to it. And I like a big old glob on there. But as always, I'm going to take my finger and push it into all of the threads. So I like contact in all of the threads. I'm going to take all that excess away. But I have a nice even coating of Loctite all through the threads. I don't have a ton of extra now, but it's on all of the threads all the way down. I'll then take the washer, put it on here, and then I'm going to flip this up. Now, I want to be careful as I do this to not get that Loctite off of the threads into that bearing, that radial bearing on the outside. I'm just going to snug this side up because obviously it's just going to spin on this side, so push that all together. And then we're going to go ahead and repeat what we just did in the opposite direction for this side. Same rodeo here. We're going to take our other spindle bolt, soak it in blue Loctite, and then again use our finger to work it all the way down the threads. Again, see, all that came off. Just want it into all the threads all the way down. Go ahead and put the washer over here. Side. Now we're going to take this blade grip and put it opposite the other one. Let's tighten that side. Now, we now need to take another 5mm driver, and we're going to go in from opposite sides, like so, and tighten it against each other slowly. And this is compressing all those O-rings. Taking the two drivers, and I'm gonna. Now, why am I making the face? It's not because I want it that tight. It's because my hands slip on these rubber grips. So, just making sure I get this right. Now, the moment of truth. We want to now take the grips into our hands and start working them back and forth. Now, these should feel tight. They should not drop under their own weight, but they should feel smooth. At no point should it feel like chick, 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 like what we would call notchy, where it feels like rough. Like it should feel smooth, but some resistance. And you'll notice in the manual there's something about after so many flights, the head will actually loosen up, and there's shims included in one of the extras bags you can add into these gaps in between here and here, should the head get looser and you're not able to tighten it down with the spindle bolts. But these should both move back and forth easily. There shouldn't be resistance, and they should be smooth. No notchiness, nice and smooth. That feels good. All right, follower arms, radius arms, whatever you want to call them. There are two bolts here, and it's important to note that one of them is 18mm long, and the other one is 20mm long. One is an M3, the one going into the head block through the radius arm here, and the one joining the two is an M2.5. So that's the way. So take the four bolts that they give you here and identify the skinnier ones first. So take those two aside, and that's what's going to join our two halves of the arms. One of the cool things SAB does is they print their logo on things. And while it seems like it's just an advertising thing, it also helps you tell which way is the correct way round. So in the case of these particular arms, there's also a little tiny logo here printed in the plastic that we'll want to face out as well. So this tells us that this arm that's going to go on the top side of our head block here is going to want the logo facing out, so it's going to go this way, and this logo is going to face out, so it's going to go this way. So I'm going to take our 18mm bolt and we're going to push it through. You'll notice there's no Loctite on here yet. It's because I don't want Loctite in these bearings, so I'm not going to risk it going through. And the next thing we're going to do is put some Loctite inside this threaded piece that's going to capture this bolt. So same thing here. I'm just going to use my awl as sort of a precise Loctite applicator. And this is just helping keep the Loctite out of bearings. It's really important that we not get Loctite where we don't want it. I'm going to dab the top just to get any Loctite out of there. and then we'll go ahead and tighten this guy down. This follower arm with the logo facing this way so that the text is upright is going to go in this hole of the head block, and you'll see there's a slightly raised lip here, and that's helps you know where it should go through. I'm going to do that same trick where I'm going to actually put the Loctite in the threads in here so that I don't risk getting any in that bearing. I'm going to dab the top, start that with my fingers, and then send it home. In some helicopters, these bolts, or some of these bolts in various follower arms, can also have a pinch functionality. In the case of this helicopter, they do not, so just snug it. Plenty of Loctite, make sure it moves freely. All right, and it's going to go across here, text upright. We're going to flip this upside down and just repeat the process on the other side. All right, and just like that, we've now got our finished rotor head here with our two follower arms on it. All right, moving on to the next page. All right, next step is the Swashplate, as well as mounting the head to the mainframe. So with the Swashplate, it's a matter of, number one, confirming all of the balls that go into all of the holes and all of the directions are all the same. Easy way to do this on most manuals, make sure the part number is the same. In this case, it is for all of these, so we don't have to pay attention to which ball goes where. They're all the same, with the exception of the alignment pin, which is down here, and we won't install that until we put this Swashplate onto the main shaft here. We're also going to go ahead and install the pitch bolts and the Jesus bolt, or the main bolt here that holds the head on stops it coming off the top of the main shaft, right? So fairly straightforward step here. This is one of those situations, if you order a complete Swashplate from SAB, they're going to go ahead and send you all of the balls as well. And since this is a super hyper crazy mission critical thing, I always go ahead and use red Loctite on the balls. But before I do anything, I'm going to go ahead and just spot check any bolt on the Swashplate itself. There are these four on top, and again, SAB does a great job of assembling these in the factory and using Loctite in all the right places. These bolts on the bottom that capture the bearing. See, this guy right here just popped right off. So I'm going to go ahead and apply a little bit of Loctite to it and then reinstall it. It does look like it had some on the threads, but maybe not enough here. The others were much firmer. So it pays off to check all of these, because you will find one every now and then like this that just could use a little more Loctite. Maybe it was the last bolt on a Friday. You never know. But pay careful attention to all of these. So check every bolt in the swash. Make sure it's not coming out. If you takes a lot of force to crack it, don't go crazy. But if you're starting to put force and it's not moving, then you know it's pretty well Loctited. So with that, that's all of the bolts in this swash checked. And I'm going to go ahead and start installing the balls. I'll show you one, and then we'll come back when it's done. So just dip the ends of the thread in a little red Loctite. Wipe up the excess on the bag, and then just go ahead and send it home. All right, I'll see you in a few minutes when I have all these done. Okay, Swashplate now is done. You'll notice that the grouping of 3 on the lower part of the Swashplate, the center one is going to be empty. That'll be for the alignment pin that we'll do in just a second together. But 4 balls on the inner swash and 1, 2, 3 on the outer. Go ahead and take some paper towel and just run it around each of these in case any of that red Loctite dripped out. You don't want any of that running down into a bearing. So I'll just give them a quick wipe down. But you also don't want any extra imperfections on the surface of these balls. All right, with that, we can now go ahead and grab our main section of the helicopter here, install the swash onto our main shaft. We're going to do this with the section here. So this is the part of our swash that will get the alignment pin. So now that that glides really smoothly already, which is great. We're going to go ahead and take our alignment pin and dip it in blue Loctite, because you may have to take this off in the event of a crash. So this one I do not put red on. So I go blue and have to kind of weave it back through the channel onto your driver. Massage the swash up to it. There we go. finger start it. There we go. So now our swash plate is captured in our channel here. Make sure everything moves freely. And then we're going to then take our rotor head and drop it on here. Now you'll see there is a hole in the main shaft here. We're going to align the hole in the head block here with that hole in the main shaft. Doesn't matter which direction it goes. Get all the follower arms out of the way. There we go. And then we're going to take our big old Jesus bolt, and then the head has a sort of oval recess that'll capture the nut. The round recess is the side you push the Jesus bolt in through. Take a minute before you tighten anything to make sure that you got the head in the hole. I don't have a nut on here because you don't want friction to get this right. You want to make sure you're through the hole and you didn't accidentally go above the main shaft because that's bad, obviously. So now that we've got the Jesus bolt through, we're going to take this nylon lock nut here and thread it through on this side. And then there's a channel that will capture that in there. And we're going to go ahead and take our driver. And I'm just going to, I'm not tightening this here. I just want to snug it up to the point where it'll stay. So I'm just going to like snug it and then back it out a quarter turn. So there's still flex there. And I'll explain why I'm doing that in just a second. And then we're going to take our two pinch bolts and get some blue Loctite on there. Again, just on the tip of this bolt. We don't need it the whole length. And we're going to start these as well. So pinch bolts will go into the side of the head block with the recess right here. And again, just snug it on that side. Get the other pinch bolt. It's really important that these two pinch bolts be equally tight. So we get them snug such that we know their starting tightness is the same. And it's also really important we tighten the pinch bolts before we tighten the Jesus bolt. So I know I have equally tight pinch bolts at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and just go quarter turn. Quarter turn, and I'm just going to keep doing this until I can't tighten them anymore. Really difficult quarter turn. About an eighth of a turn was all I could get there, so it should be the same here. And it is. Okay, now that those are tight, I can come in and tighten the Jesus bolt. All right, lastly, last step here is to go ahead and install our main blade links. It doesn't really matter, but to look at the manual, the turnbuckle goes closest to the top here, and in all of these pitch lengths, it's important to make sure you get them round the right way. So if you look really closely at the ball link, you can see that one side will be narrower and the other side wider. The nice thing about these SAB ones is the side with this little slot in it right here is the wider side. That's the side that goes against the ball, is the side with the slot. The cleaner looking slide that doesn't have this little hole in it is the side that will face out or away from the ball. We have a pair of balling pliers. You can use your fingers for these. Don't mangle them with something else, however. Make sure they are on. Our main drive link here is going to go to this portion. So the part of the swash plate that has sort of these angled brackets that comes out. And showing you here, I've got the turnbuckle here closest to the top of the head. Again, doesn't really matter, but you should just put them the same side. And then we're engaged on this ball link. We're on the little shootout arm of the swash plate here. And again, we've got our ball link such that the correct side is facing out. And then go ahead and snap your follower arms onto the swash plate as well. So, all right, with that, we've got our rotor head now onto our main frame here. Now we're going to go ahead and build the links that are going to go between our servos and our swash plate. So let's stick that aside. We can see that we want roughly 47 millimeters. The most important thing is that all three are as close to exactly the same length as humanly possible. They give you a nice description of the geometry here if you want to verify it at any point. I will show you one link here, and then you'll go ahead and build the other two on your own. These are a little fussier because it's a little trickier to hold. This is the Lynx balling pliers. I think most balling pliers have a provision like this, but you can use this little groove in the plier to kind of hold the link on one side, and then go ahead and get it started on the other side, and it'll stop it from spinning. And use the tool to thread these on, and then you can kind of use the balling tool to hold the other end, and we'll get our calipers out and set those for 47 millimeters, and these are going to be at 90 degrees to each other. So we'll do our first test fit here. All right, we've got our caliper set to 47 millimeters, and it looks like we went a hair too small. All right, there's one at 47. I'm going to repeat the process for the other two. All right, with our 3 links built, we can go ahead and bring our sub-assembly back this way and go ahead and pop these onto our servos and swash. Again, pay attention to which way the ball links are going and make sure you get them right, and then make sure you get kind of the angle right so that the way it's hitting the servo and the ball is truly flat on to the ball itself. So, you know, the top one is angled kind of correctly to the ball, and the bottom one to the servo ball. So if you pop the servo side on first, you can then kind of just set the angle of the upper link correctly. And pop that. There's 2 out of 3. And then lastly, our elevator servo in the back here. I'm always afraid it'll like be talking to camera and I will like put one of these links on backwards, because it's easy to do, and every time I do one of these build videos somebody catches me doing something while I'm yakking away. So these balls are tight. Some kits they'll pop on without balling pliers, not this one. Pretty tight tolerances, all of which will loosen up over time. All right, so now we have our main frame. We've got our linkages from our servo all the way up to our blade grips, follower arms, main head, swash plate. All that is looking good. Lastly, before I forget, I'm going to take a little bit of Tri-Flow synthetic lubricant in liquid form, and I'm just going to put a little bit in the swash and let that work its way up and down the main shaft. There we go. Great. All right, lower side frames. So you can see here in the manual, this is where those country flag stickers that are in the box, if you want to, you can go ahead and stick it on the lower side frame. I love that the nubs, the spacers, are incorporated into the battery tray here that are sticking through our side frames. Looks like we've got some bushings that will slide over those, and then M3 bolts with a finishing washer. We'll go ahead and lay the helicopter on its side. Take a bushing, 1, 2, 3, 4 of those bushings down there, and then side frame wise, it looks like those line up nicely. Get our Loctite, maybe put a little more here. And we're just going to work our way down through the side frame. Kind of line the first one up this way. Again, as always, just put them in loose until you get all 4 bolts in, and then send them home. Okay, flip it over. Other side, same rodeo. All right, starting to sit higher on the table now that we have the lower side frames bolted on to both sides. I'm going to skip the country flag. I'm going to wait and see what the whole thing looks like once it's all together. Okay, skids. Tell you what, let's see if we can get this thing on skids before maybe we hit a little resting point. We're going to go ahead and install the canopy front attachment point first. So we'll go ahead and flip this so the recess is facing up like that,
And then we have these self-tapping screws that go in from the underside. And I love that they still put hex head self-tapping screws in here instead of versus putting a Phillips head self-tapper in here. So obviously no Loctite, this is just self-tapping screw into plastic through plastic. So if it's not metal to metal, we don't use Loctite here. So just 4 screws in here. I'm going to slide the pipes through, so they'll go in the side with the canopy clamp first, with the rake, forward rake going towards the angled up part of the pipe. Get this side in and this side in. And basically it looks like this next bag is just going to be 4 screws, 4 finishing washers through, and then obviously wait to tighten these 4 bolts all the way until it's sitting on the skids. All right, we're going to bring this part over and we're going to set it on top of the skids and just kind of loosely get things in. And these are nylon lock nuts that are impregnated in these skids, so we will not use any Loctite in this step. Again, we're going to leave all this loose until we see how it sits, make sure it sits flat. It's sitting nice and flat, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten all 4 of the skid attachment bolts, and then we'll investigate how to deal with these self-tapping screws. We're going to lay the helicopter on its side. We're going to center the logo here in this gap between the skids, and then we're tightening this self-tapping screw while we hold the angled portion of the skid flat against the bench. Let's see how this works out. It feels like it's starting to grab now. So one of my least favorite steps of a build is the little grub screws that traditionally would go in from the top side of the skid into the skid pipes. So far these are going in much easier, so kudos to SAB on that. There's one side. Flip it. I'm going to flip it this way, make it a little easier on me for this last one. Last step of the day, now that this is sitting on skids, is to take our little tiny ends and just CA them. Yeah, these are a real loose fit here, into the ends of our skid pipes. If you're anything like me, you're really good at getting this everywhere but where you want it. I'm terrible with CA. And a little paper towel, because inevitably put too much in, and just to wipe off the excess. Shockingly, I haven't glued my fingers in yet. And we now have the main rotor head, our cyclic servos installed, our upper and lower frames, and the helicopter is on skids.